I am feeling some kind of way, a bit reflective lately. I'm not sure if it's the leave that'll start in July, the birthdays we've celebrated as a family, the anniversary Sharon's going through. We've had a few funerals as a community. But when I get reflective about time that has passed, a song always comes up to mind. I really love it. You know it. You forget the words every year, but it's for Auld Lang Syne. I think about it even before New Year's, because that's when I get kind of stuck in the past. The song, these words by Robert Burns that go pretty far back. I think it's like the late 1700s. They have a timeless quality about them. Something that could be true 3,000 years ago, 30 years ago. It's got lyrics about gathering flowers on the hillside, or the beauty of splitting a check, right? Like, surely you'll buy your cup and surely I'll buy mine, right? That's the lyric. But that phrase, Auld Lang Syne, it's an old Scots translation. The direct word for it is long time since. But in common English, we have a catchphrase or a phrase that would work, and it's the good old days. When you are singing this song, it is unapologetically a song about raising a glass to the good old days. I want to share a little bit of my good old days with you. I have one of my old pictures. Brace yourself for an bare-faced Luke. This is from my second year of grad school, my second year of seminary. These are my two roommates. The guy I got my arm around, I'm the guy on the right, just to clarify. The guy in the middle is Robert. At that time, we called him Bert, and I still can't get used to calling him Robert. But anyway, and then the guy on the left is Brian Choi. These guys, these were my brothers, as best I could tell. When I moved to California, I had a first year grad school as a whole thing, but Brian and I came in, and Bert was a year ahead of us. So Bert's roommates all left, and then me and Brian took their spots. So for 2.5 years, it was the three of us. And I can't tell you how much time we shared, what it's like. When I think back to my time at seminary, it's living with these guys that really gets me nostalgic. I think of the mornings where I was always the one who made coffee, and I had to hear Bert's commentary on it. Brian and I played so much poker. I think we were poker players who happened to go to seminary. And I can't tell you how much pizza got consumed by the three of us. When I finally, I had this whole deconstruction from Christian faith in my college years, and all I knew was I'm going to eventually come back to it. I found it sitting next to Brian and went, "Hey Brian, tell me if any of this makes sense." And when I got done, he said, "The pizza has clearly gotten to your head." And when it was time for me to move, I was the first one to leave. I had a program in D.C. to go to. When we were leaving, Bert, Pastor Robert, who calls him that? Nobody. It's whole church now. He was getting married. He got married that week, the week I left. And Brian, he was going to go to Korea. He's a second generation. His dad was full Korean, didn't speak a lot of English. When they took me to Koreatown, it was a whole thing. But he was raised in Louisville, because you can't call it Louisville. That's Louisville, Kentucky. And he loved punk music, and he really shared, this immigrant experience, even though he's this second generation. And he wanted to go back to Korea to teach English for a couple of reasons. One, to not be the only Korean anywhere, but to actually be in a sea of Koreans. And then second, the money. It was particularly good to go to Korea and teach English, and he had an in. When we left, that was how it left. And by the end of, he kind of disconnected from everything. He never had a Facebook account. He never, he had a cell phone, but his numbers kept changing. He was one of those guys. I don't know if we have them anymore, but back then, I mean, this is 20 years ago. But Brian, so we fell out of touch. He went to Korea. It was international, and no email really connected. Bert and I, we texted pretty regularly. He's a pastor in Ohio now. But we really fell out. And I can look back at those days with such fondness, almost to the point of grief. Because I felt like I was in a real, community of people who understood me, who were wrestling with the questions I was wrestling with. I can romanticize it like there was nothing wrong. There was plenty wrong. You can ask me afterwards. For old time's sake. And it's very human to do this, to look back at yesteryears and to look and opine, to grieve and to care. I mean, when I look at what's showing in movie theaters, if it's not a remake, a reboot, or a sequel, or suddenly we're going to take a cartoon and make it live action, what is that trying to do but recapture something that mattered in the past for us and see if we can generate that feeling? The number of books that talk about generational comparisons. I'll share this in case you were wondering how old I am. I am the last generation that grew up analog. When I grew up, there was no internet. So all of my mistakes, there are no record. And when you say that, people are like, oh yeah, those were the days. And we're never going back. We can pull up apps that can help limit the internet's involvement in our life, but we're not going to make up a world where it doesn't exist. And that's to say nothing of politics. It's not new to look back at some make-believe former time and say, if we could just go back then, and by the way, if you vote for me, I will lead us back then. And of course, church is notorious for this. There used to be a bishop I really liked once said, churches were meant to be hospitals, not museums. Feel that. Churches were meant to be hospitals, not museums. Why does that have such resonance? Because how many churches have we been in or have felt in us where the church is something I need to preserve? I feel a certain way about church, about this thing at church, and it has to be the way I remember it. And if you blend it with that whole generational thing, we look back, I swear, every generation of church can be romanticized except the one we live in. You look back, the greatest generation, the ones that came back from World War II up until about Vietnam, that time of church life in America is so romanticized by longtime church folks, it kind of stalls imagination. Before that, the one-room schoolhouse, and having a church be like the center of community that everybody would drive towards. The generation before that, where we had itinerant preachers who would have 11 churches to visit. You got communion once a month. Why? Because that's how often the pastor showed up. But you still had church 3 other weeks in the month because one of you took turns preaching the word. Or the European model, where a town was a town because the town was built around the church. To say nothing of scriptural images of what the church could and should be. But that's not what I read. When I read the passage from Acts today, you can go back to it. It's the last bit of the chapter 2. It's so picturesque. It reminds me of people who talk about the 60s like it was like the best time to ever be a Christian. You talk about, and some of this, I might be I kept telling everybody who would listen, the cynic in me kept boiling up reading the passage this week. The passage that said that the whole church had everything in common. I am quicker to believe the dead rise from the grave than 5 of us in this room having everything in common. So what's happening here? Is it just a look back and go, oh, those were the days? I don't think so. I don't hear a scrapbook. What I see is what I hear is a heartbeat, a rhythm. This isn't the gospel writing saying those are the good old days. This is the gospel writer, Luke, by the way, saying, pay attention. This is what happens when the Holy Spirit is moving through your community. There's devotion. There's the breaking of bread. There are things in common. There's praise of God. And there's a sense that you're working together. This is not nostalgia. It's a pattern. Because nostalgia is a fragile thing. It would belong to only one time, one place, one perfect storm that we just couldn't create again. Lightning captured in a bottle. But this is durable. This shows up whenever people risk living like none of us belong simply to yourself. This happens when you start living for more than just you. Like the most important thing in your life actually exists outside of your own mind and body. It shows up in living rooms, fellowship halls. It shows up at potlucks where you better get there early because the good hot dish is going to run out quick. It shows up when someone says, I don't know what I can spare, but what I can hear. It shows up when forgiveness, that feeling you got in your gut that you got to let this go, that you got to forgive that person, is actually costly. What we're hearing in Acts is not, hey, go back to this time. It's, this will keep happening. And it's going to be real when it does. Because the Holy Spirit didn't simply retire to the first century. To go back to my favorite song, there's a verse in it that just gets me. We too, who've paddled in the storm from morning sun till nigh, the seas between us roared and swelled since the days of old Lang Syne. The seas between us have roared and swelled. Yeah. When I went on living after seminary, and my whole, modern life kind of existed back in Minnesota. As I said, Robert and I, we texted when anytime I was getting reappointed, anytime I got a new church, I'm like, you're not allowed to tell anybody. I'd call Robert because he's in Ohio. I'm like, who's he going to tell? He came to my wedding, and he had a great time at my wedding, let me tell you what. He was one of my groomsmen. And when I introduced him to the bishop, the bishop came to my wedding, and he was like, Bishop, this is my old roommate from seminary, Bert. And he goes, hi. And she goes, well, who are you working with? And he goes, oh, Patricia Ferris. She goes, she was my roommate in seminary. And Bert just immediately, oh, she knows. Never heard from Brian. I never heard from, and I would Google the guy every once in a while, and that is so scary. To go a decade without hearing from someone. The last you heard is he went to Korea. I couldn't find his family. His parents they had moved, they were still in Kentucky, but Googling last name Choi, it's one of the most common last names on the planet. Maybe not in Minnesota, but everywhere else. But a couple of years ago, I got a hit. Typing in Brian Choi, Claremont, which is where we went to seminary. Because sometimes, in church profiles, your schooling shows up. Bingo. There's a newspaper out in Pennsylvania. Pastor Brian Choi. Show the picture. He's just moved from Oregon and his family. And I'm like, he's married. Whoa. To a Korean woman, clearly, and everything. He's got a boy and a girl. Oh my God. And he's Presbyterian. Since when? So I called the church. It doesn't they don't give you out the number and everything. I call the church, and it goes to voicemail, and I hang up, and I'm like, oh, gosh. And my phone rings, and it's the number. And I answer, and I go, hello? He goes, and I hear, hi, is this, did somebody just call such and such Presbyterian church? This is the phone number that we have in case anybody has need. And this is such an inside joke, but I have to tell you, I just go, what's up, pocket change? And the string of words that come out of his mouth, and it was like, and I just, in that phone call, all Brian Choi comes rushing back. It's such a memory. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy, I love him. I love Brian Choi so much. But the guy, I don't know if I ever want to hear his sermons because the guy can't tell a story without telling you every detail. Absolutely every single one. I think we had a half-hour conversation. I think I said 5 words. I'm married with kids. 4. I'm married with, yeah. And a couple of years later, so I got his phone number, and we started texting, and we text. About years ago, since I've been here, actually, I took a vacation. Some of you, I know you don't track my vacations like that, but I went to Ohio. Brian from Pennsylvania, me from Minnesota, we got our families together, and Bert has 2 little girls, Brian has 2 kids, I got my 3, and there we are in Ohio. And let's see the picture. I got another picture, the modern one. Both of us set up side by side. Yeah, right? While there, I got Brian, Bert and I talk enough. I really had to talk to Brian. And over pizza, I just said to him, Brian, you told me everything about what's happened in the last 13 years. You've been in the States. You were in Oregon and Washington. Now you're here, and man, you should have been at my wedding. You should have got the birth announcement. I should have gotten your kids' birth announcements. Man, what happened? I'm not angry. I'm sad that I missed out on so much of your life. And he put up his hands and he just said, I always meant to. I was always planning on it. It's just one thing happens after another, yeah. The seas between us roared and swelled since the days of old Lang Syne. What roaring and swelling seas rage between you and some previous time that you remember fondly? We can't go back. I am never going to live near Brian Choi, probably ever again. Even though every time I talk to him on the phone, I can tell him, hey, I got 5 churches in Minnesota that need a pastor. We accept Presbyterians. Most of the time. live with him again. But we can gather together, raise a glass to that time, and honor it. And live in the now, having been formed by that time. And it's not just for the good stuff, it's the hard stuff. When I look back at us as a universal church or us as a nation, there were times like the 60s and 70s and 80s of church life, for some of us, are the ideal time. But for some of us, there was some real pain, real hurt that had to come out later or that we knew at the time, but we just rather not talk about. And the roaring seas and the swelling waters between now and then, we should address it. Feel it, whether it's grief or joy, recognizing that distance. We can spend our lives chasing some version of church that only really exists in hindsight. We can tell stories of times where church felt simpler or more respected, more whatever. But we don't live in the past. The internet isn't going away. History actually has happened. And for some, trust has been broken. So the question isn't how do we get back? The question is how do we carry what has been forward? Because the holy part, the holy of church life, was never in a decade or in a denomination. It's in the devotion. It's in the table and the shared life together. It's in the quiet, stubborn decision to follow Jesus no matter what. And we can still do that. Every time we eat together, instead of rushing past each other, every extra minute you spend in a fellowship hall getting to know someone you've never met, every time we choose generosity over scarcity, every time we carve out a little more time in a loud world to say we're going to pay attention to what God is doing in each other's lives. That is how we live the book of Acts, not just back then, but now. And someday, someone else will look at this time. Someone is going to look at this time as the good old days. Not because everything was perfect, because, man, I'm looking at some church leaders, and right now you're like, perfect. And not because we got it all right. Lord knows I've made a few. And I'm not going to point at any other fingers but me. But because we choose as church in our time, with all its noise, with all its fracture and challenge and change, to live like we belong to one another. So yes, we raise a glass, not just to the good old days, but to the grace that made them good. And the Spirit that is still making something good out of us right now. Amen.